It's Halloween. It's officially the spookiest day of the year. I've got my Bloodborne t-shirt on and I'm ready to do this thing. So last year on the channel, I looked at what I believe to be my top 10 most terrifying Bleach characters. And this year, I wanted to try something a little different, a little bloodier. So we're going to be looking at what I think are the top 10 bloodiest, goriest, most wince-inducing moments in the series. The term gruesome that I've used in the title is a bit of a blanket umbrella term that can really cover so many things. And as with the last ranking video I did on the channel, there are just so many potential options for this video. Bleach, of course, is a battle manga aimed at a slightly more mature audience, and so there is an awful lot of violence in the series. Now, generally speaking, the gore, the blood, whatever you want to call it in Bleach, skews towards being more stylized. It's very stylistic. When a character is cut, there will generally be a fountain spurt of blood that looks very dynamic and obviously not particularly realistic. However, Kubo loves to play with that body horror, particularly as the series went on. Bleach just got more and more graphic, essentially. He was willing to show more when it came to the injuries in the series, and looking at this list was actually kind of fun to see just how dark Kubo would go in places. And before we kick the video off, I just want to say that this list, for mostly my own sake, but also because those moments really held the most impact, is only going to focus on characters who are named in the series. So, sorry random squad member who got his head sliced in half, unfortunately you don't quite make the cut. And of course, one final thing before we begin, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, guys, make sure to do that now. You're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week, and I would really appreciate the support. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up so it gets more reach, more exposure on YouTube, and can reach more Bleach fans like yourselves. And if you want to support me a little bit more, we do have a Patreon for the channel as well now, where you can get videos early, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month. So to everyone who's already doing that, I really appreciate it. And as always, make sure to leave your own lists in the comments below. I'm almost certain I've missed some probably crazy gruesome moments that would definitely make a list of your own making. So please let me know in the comments, because like I said, there were just so many choices for this particular video. So many, in fact, that I have a few honourable mentions I want to go over before we kick it off with the actual top 10. So looking at our honourable mentions for the most gruesome moments in Bleach, these ones didn't quite make the list for me, but I do think they are still quite impactful all the same. The first one being when Tosen is struck by Kokujo Tengen Myo. And I was really taken aback by this back in the day. You see his arm, it's twisted and mangled and truly busted up. And it was actually really cool as well, because it was the first time we really got to see what Kokujo Tengen Myo could actually do against someone who was essentially just a regular human in terms of their stature, at least. Anyway, because up until now, the only opponent that had actually really tangled with that Bankai was Choneng Po, who was absolutely enormous. So seeing Tosen's arm so twisted and broken by that one hit was honestly pretty cool. Another honourable mention is Yamamoto taking revenge against Sternritter O, the Overkill Driscoll Bursey, and literally ripping the flesh from his bones with Ryujin Jaka. Ryujin Jaka has been used a few times in the series prior to this, but we've never really seen it do such extensive damage to a character. This is an attack that was, used with the intent to kill, and kill it does. Driscoll's face is literally scorched from his bones, and then to add insult to injury, the bones themselves crumble away to dust. Up next on our rather extensive list of honourable mentions is also another one from the first Quincy invasion, when poor Izuru Kira is targeted and blasted by Bazby. And this really helped kick this whole invasion off. It was honestly really crazy just to see Kira's whole body missing a massive chunk out of it, his arm still clutching his Zanpakuto toe down on the floor. A really nice visual, and really helped set the tone for what to come. To kind of add to the gruesomeness of that particular moment is the fact that Kira would be resurrected later on with some metal bars essentially holding his body together. So that moment for me has always kind of stuck in my mind. Another honourable mention is perhaps an unexpected one, but this is actually Kenpachi versus Giriko, or specifically Kenpachi killing Giriko. Now, really, this is only on here for one panel, that final page where Giriko is split in two, blood is raining down, and Kenpachi says how boring he was. You might be thinking, well, we barely even see it, we barely can tell what's going on, and people get cut in half a lot in this series. But what really makes this one stand out to me is how real it is, how raw it is. Giriko might be a villain, but he's a human at the end of the day, and Kenpachi's just split this guy in two in fairly graphic detail. Like, it's more graphic than something like Tesla was back in the Irankar arc, and it hits harder than something like Gerard Valkyrie in the Thousand Year Blood War because, well, Gerard's an angel who will just return back to life anyway. Other than Time Tells No Lies, his inherent Fullbringer abilities, and yeah, the fact that he's not a very nice guy, Giriko is a human, and it makes this moment hit even harder for me, and it is pretty gory. Kubo does draw it in some detail, him splitting in two. And then my final honourable mention is one that is kind of more implied than actually shown. When looking at this list, I really wanted to go for moments of gruesomeness that are actually shown in the series, because the series can get pretty dark. But the actual idea behind this transformation is pretty messed up. And that is Aizen's final Hogyoku transformation against Ichigo. His face literally splits in half. It rips in half, and he's like screaming in agony as he's just like roaring at this transformation. His skull, I guess, kind of emerges from between his face. It's now all black and demonic looking. And what really adds to this, the body horror element here, is that the kind of sides of Aizen's face are like left hanging on the edge of his new face, like some kind of used up bag or something that's been like shredded in the middle. You can see the empty eye sockets. Kubo loves to get creepy, as we'll see later on, and Aizen's transformation is really up there. You don't actually see it for the most part. You get a kind of really stylized page in the manga where there's like a crack going down the panel of his face, but then other than that, that's all you get to see, so that's why it's only an honourable mention. And coming in at number 10 on our most gruesome Bleach moments is Asnot's transformation into his second form, whatever this gigantic eldritch abomination thing actually is in his fight with Rukia Kuchiki. Az was probably always going to make this list to some degree, much like he made the last Halloween list. He is very much made for this holiday, being the Stern Ritter of Fear. And Kubo once again is really pushing the boundaries of Bleach body horror with this character. This moment is just so gruesome and awesome to witness. Basically, Az, in his holy form, has a stitch running right down his body, and it just rips open, it bursts at the seams, blood goes everywhere, and then that blood is replaced by a gigantic, twisting Asnot head. It sounds very strange to explain it, but this is what happens. You see his eyeballs, his head kind of emerges from his own body. He almost like births himself, to the point where you end up with this new colossal tentacled Asnot, where his old form is now being worn like a mask dangling from his chin. It's gross, it's awesome, and it makes this list. Az, just has an amazing design, and Kubo was clearly having a ton of fun with this guy. And I think we all can't wait to see him in the anime, so Asnot 100% making the list with that moment. Coming in at number 9 is something a little more, I guess, subdued in comparison to that, as his transformation is very big, very bombastic. This is a slightly more shocking moment, a quieter moment, but surprising and pretty gory all the same. And that's Hiyori being cut in half by Gin Ichimaru during the fake Karakura Town fight. Now, as always, there is context needed with a lot of this. You have to realise if you weren't reading it weekly, the Irankar arc was never that gory. A lot of the stuff was either implied or it was very stylized. Kubo only really started going crazy with the gore in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, so a moment like this hit like a brick. It was absolutely enormous, seeing Hiyori actually split in half by Gin's attack. The way Kubo frames it, as I've mentioned on this channel before, is wonderful to see. You get a really awesome panel of her kind of like looking shocked, and the panel cuts off where he cuts her. So it's like the panel is doing the cutting. And there's obviously that wonderful couple of panels where she looks behind her and she can see her legs falling behind. Much later on, Shinji is like cradling the top half of her body while her feet are in the foreground. It's just really, really cool, and we honestly thought Hiyori might die in this moment back in the day, and it still sticks with me now as a moment that is, you know, it comes out of nowhere as just being particularly gruesome. Kind of similar to the Wonder Weiss and Ukitake moment, but I think the reason that hasn't made the list is it's not lingered on quite so much. It just sort of happens and then it's over and done with, whereas this felt like a bigger deal to me anyway. Now, I know I just said that the Arrancar arc is not particularly gruesome, but coming in at number 8 is another moment from the Fate Karakura Town battle, and that is Soifon's arm rotting away. And again, this was another moment that I could not believe I was reading. We really had never seen anything like it. And so Soifon is now up against the second Espada, Baragon Luisenbahn, who has just activated his Resurrection Arrogante and used his new ability Respirar, which you might remember if you watched the video appeared on my top 10 most broken abilities. And that's because when Respirar touches Soifon, it begins to age her rapidly, and she just suddenly looks at her arm and realises that her fingers are now bone. And what's kind of crazy about this moment is that you can like see the point where her hand is still flesh, and then you can see it going up her arm. The next panel, there is more bone than there was before, and her whole arm is just essentially disintegrating before her eyes, before Omaida has to cut it off. It's, again, just an absolutely insane moment to revisit, and it is pretty gruesome to just, you know, imagine being Soifon in that moment, watching her arm just fade away, essentially, turn into bone and then turn into dust. And for me, it more than deserves its spot on here. It's given real prominence during that fight. As I've mentioned before, again on this channel, I think that's the peak of that entire battle. It's just such a crazy, gory moment when you think about, sure, perhaps this isn't the bloodiest moment because there's no blood involved, but the actual gruesome nature of what's happening to this character is something that is uncontestable in my opinion. Coming in at number 7, we have a moment from one of my favourite battles in the 1000 Year Blood War arc, and this comes from the Yhwach versus Ichibe fight, and that's the moment Ichibe is killed. Now, his actual death is pretty gruesome in and of itself. Yhwach just basically blows him up. He does his pretty traditional at this point finger gun essentially, where he just pops them like a balloon. And you get a great splash page on the final page of the fight where Ichibe just is literally in pieces. He's blowing up. There's blood and guts everywhere. That alone would probably make this list, but the reason it really makes the list for me is it's given another chance to really hit home with just how gory Kubo makes the follow-up. So at the start of the next chapter, Yhwach is basically walking through a rain of Ichibe's body parts. Ichibe's body, his head hits the floor. You get an amazing panel where Yhwach is walking past Ichibe's head on one side, his foot on the other. It's like a way more extreme version of the Hiyori moment. But then to make it even better, Ichigo and his friends arrive a little bit later on and discover Ichibe's corpse, or the many pieces of his corpse, and it's just something out of a horror movie. Again, you only have to put yourself in their shoes. Imagine yourself arriving on this scene, and there is Ichibe lying in literally pieces on the ground. Kubo gets really cool and creative with this as well, showing us Ichibe's head, and then Ichigo and the gang kind of looking down on it. It's pretty gruesome stuff. Coming in at number 6, we have a, again, surprisingly gory moment for relatively early on in the series. Again, that's not to say Bleach didn't have gore early on in the series, but it was definitely slightly less pronounced during the Arrancar arc. But this was also a very satisfying moment for a large part of the fan base, and that's where Grimmjow kills Luffy and restores his status as the 6th Espada. It's just really awesome seeing the way he does this. Grimmjow, up until this point, did kind of have a tendency to attack people with just his bare hands as opposed to his Zanpakuto. He impales Rukia in the gut with his hand, but this time he goes a step further, and you get that really nice moment where his tattoo is restored and Luffy is like, what do you think you're doing? And then you just turn the page and Grimmjow's entire hand is through Luffy's gut, come bursting out of his back. Yeah, it's just really cool. It's one of those moments that's, again, ultra stylized, but really just works really well. Really showcasing Grimmjow's brutality, how much he wanted that position back, how essentially ineffective Luffy is in comparison. And it's just a really powerful moment seeing that hand bursting through Luffy's back. Someone sort of punching their hand through someone else is very much a Bleach trope. This is not the only time this happens. Noitora does it to Kenpachi in a very similar fashion, and it happens throughout most of the arcs in the series, but this is the one that always stood out the most to me. It's very gory. You see Grimmjow's whole... I think it's the fact that it's like a full body shot. Like, you see Grimmjow himself with his... basically just holding Luffy up by his own spine, effectively. It's a really awesome scene, just looks fantastic as well, and it's a great character moment for Grimmjow. And so to begin the top 5 on this list, we actually have quite a somber moment. Probably one of, if not one of 2, saddest moments on this list, and that is the death of Yamamoto. And again, it's just so raw how much you actually see here, and this was Kubo really just no longer caring about any kind of censorship or anything like that. Yamamoto is cut in 2, and almost like watching the event in slow motion, you see blood come out of his mouth, and then his body just like falls off the bottom half of his body in slow motion. His legs are still standing there, but the top half of Yama is falling down to the ground. It's really grisly. It's just crazy stuff that you never have really seen before in the series. Like I mentioned earlier with the Hiyori moment, it is for the most part implied. It's mostly hidden what actually happens to her. Had she been cut in half like that in the 1,000-Year Blood War, I suspect we would have actually seen it, but with Yamamoto we do see it full on. To make matters even worse, he kind of subconsciously tries to grab Yuhaba's cape, and his arm is immediately cut off, and you can even see the bone and everything. It's really, really gory, and the finale for Yamamoto as a character is a brutal one. Coming in at number 4, we have a pick that is maybe overlooked. I don't think people would necessarily be expecting this on here, but in my opinion, this is definitely one of the most gruesome, certainly one of the most wince-inducing moments in Bleach, and that's when Ginjo Kugo slices open Ichigo's eyes. Yeah, again, this was another moment where you turn the page, and I couldn't believe it back in the day. I was like, it's so dark. This is one of those moments where it is so dark that Kubo doesn't actually show it. You see the back of Ichigo's head and like a swipe motion across the front of his face. But what is really gory about this scene is that, particularly at the end of this chapter and then throughout the next one, you do actually get a good look at Ichigo's eyes, and there's a line going through them. Now, this isn't the only time eyes are targeted in the series. For example, Kisuke's eyes are actually destroyed in the battle with Askin, but there's something about this one in particular. The fact that they are well and truly lingered upon. They are focused on. You can see the injury going through his eyes. Blood is running down Ichigo's face. Now, of course, Ginjo does do this in service of Ichigo's training, but it doesn't make the moment any less sort of cringy at how blisteringly painful that must be. Yeah, so for me, that's an easy one to put on the list. And so we're in the top 3 now for what I believe to be the best and most gruesome moments in the series. And this one was an easy winner. For me, it was a contender for first place. But in the end, I decided to pull it back just a little bit. And this is when Matsumoto has her entire side gouged out by Aion. in the Fate Karakura Town battle. And this is the highest ranking Arrancar arc moment for me. It is truly the moment where I think Kubo was like, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to go crazy here. Because well and truly, even with things like arms going through bodies and stuff like that, it still felt very comic book. And yet, there's something about this moment that is exceedingly grotesque in its portrayal. I don't know if it's maybe just how quick it happens. It all happens like that. It's over in a flash. But Matsumoto tries to ready herself against this new, very alien, strange, demonic creature, Aion. And you turn the page and he's lunged at her. He's already there, in fact. And he just sort of... It's strange as well how he just sort of breezes past her and her entire side is gone. What makes it even worse than, say, something like the Kira moment that was an honourable mention is the fact that you get a nice old close-up of Aion inspecting her fully realised chunk of side that's come out of her. And it's still so crazy to me to this day, but it's so effective as well. After weeks of the Fraction basically being completely worthless, Aion actually does something that really kind of scared us as readers and, you know, rooting for the Shinigami. All of a sudden, Matsumoto is missing basically like half of her body, and this massive creature is just holding it in his hand in such grotesquely realised detail. But for me, that moment is so crazy, and I think it's a massive shame the way it was utterly butchered in the anime. You know, for censorship reasons. Not the only moment either. Things like Hiyori as well. Soifon's arm rotting off is actually remarkably well handled in the anime, I think. But for moments like Matsumoto being attacked by Aion, the manga is the place to go for the real feeling of dread it gives you, and just for how damn gruesome it is as well. Coming in at number 2, we have the death of one of my personal favourite characters, Askin Naklavar. Right towards the end of the series, Askin is duelling Kisuke Urahara when suddenly from behind an arm erupts out of his chest, bursting through the front of him like something out of Alien, and he's effectively dead at this point, although he does still survive a little longer. But you might be thinking, well, you know, we've had arms going through people before, this is nothing new, except this time Kubo just takes it to the next level, and once again gives Grimmjow the honour of being the one to impale somebody like this. But where in the loopy example, Grimmjow just punches his hand through him, in this example, Grimmjow grabs Askin's heart on the way and pushes it out of his body, bursting open his ribcage, and Grimmjow's blood-soaked arm, it's completely covered in blood, like you can barely tell it's his arm, is just holding Askin's heart in front of his face. The man who thought he was far away from death is now staring at his own heart. There's even like veins and things connecting to it and coming down. It's just so gross and so awesome. It's a great end to an otherwise really good fight, and it kind of gets even more grotesque when Grimmjow decides, you know, that's not enough, I'm just going to crush Askin's heart in my hand and watch the blood go everywhere. So, very fitting for Halloween. You know, Bleach actually went there in the end and actually forcibly removed somebody's heart. You know, there are a lot of things towards the end of the series that maybe would have been gruesome at one time, but either we were so desensitized to it at that point, or the characters themselves were so fantastical that it didn't quite have the same impact. My best example for that would be, I guess, someone like Gerard Valkyrie getting split in half by Kenpachi. As I mentioned earlier about the Giriko fight, it doesn't land the same way because not only are we desensitized to it, but Gerard is like this gigantic angel man who can just pull himself back together again. And yet there was something so grounded about Askin, and seeing his heart just removed from his body in the most literal sense will really stick with you. But our number one pick is yet another one that is quite somber. And you might disagree with me, but for me, this is probably the ultimate moment of gore and brutality in the series that isn't just mindless, but felt very emotional as well. And this is Byakuya's near death at the hands of Asnot, where basically his entire chest cavity is gouged out by his own Bankai. Now, the severity of the injury is kind of downplayed a little bit later on, but actually going back and revisiting this moment in the manga itself, it is difficult to read, and it was hard to watch back in the day. But Asnot, having taken control of Senbonzakura Kageyoshi, now uses it to repeatedly smash Byakuya into a wall over and over again in a very violent display, the likes of which we've never seen from this incredibly powerful technique, now being used with no finesse, with no skill, but just pure hatred and ferocity. And Byakuya's arm is ripped out of its socket and he is smashed into the wall, where you have to imagine as well, remember what Senbonzakura actually is. It's like a chainsaw of blades just gnawing away at his stomach. And you're left with a very quiet and sad and yet profound image. An image that for many people really made the first invasion. And that is just a completely destitute Byakuya slumped in the wall. More blood on the outside than in. You can even see how many layers of stone he's actually been smashed through. Just going off the top of my head, I think it's about 4. There's like 3 or 4 lines of layers of stone that he has been pushed through. And to really hit the nail on the head with this moment in the best quality scans, so for example, the volumes behind me, you can even make out his rib cage in this scene. Everything has been carved away, and you can see his bones. You can see his bones in the middle of his body, and it's a haunting image. You know, I've even got a whole video up on this channel, and it's something that has been debated endlessly among the community as to whether or not he should have died during this moment. It's not something we need to get into now. But the actual imagery on show here is very graphic, very violent, gory, bloody, and heart-wrenching. You know, it's thought-provoking, it's amazing. Again, Byakuya is such a model Shinigami as well, and to see him reduced to this is very difficult to witness, and yet we did, and it was a crazy, crazy moment. And so for me, that's my number one pick for the most gruesome moment in Bleach. And that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you weren't too grossed out. Bleach does have some amazingly graphic fight scenes and really fun moments in it. Kubo is, of course, a master at his craft, a master at body horror, drawing wounds and blood and all this sort of thing. And so many of the fights have these amazing moments that are really fun to visit on a day like Halloween. As always, guys, let me know in the comments below what you think of my list and what your own list would be as well. Have I missed some moments out? I almost certainly have, so please let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe, guys, and until next time, I'll catch you later. Have an amazing Halloween, and yeah, until next time, I'll see you then. Goodbye.